Hey folks, this one's coming from the hip, partly because it's somewhat breaking news. We've too much stuff to edit over here. I don't have time to fancy it up, and partly because I'm just so fucking angry about it that I just wanted to get behind a camera and talk about it. So obviously PlayStation has announced that they're backing off of physical releases for their games, starting, I believe it's January of next year. This has been something that has caused a massive reaction within the gaming community, both gamers and people who have business interests within games. It's no doubt going to have catastrophic effects to things like preservation, which has already struggled in the sort of digital present that we exist in. It's probably going to be the death knell, the final nail in the coffin for retail sales eventually. And yeah, more importantly than anything else, it's a consumer choice nightmare because it essentially locks people into digital storefronts. A lot of this stuff has been talked about. I want to talk about an aspect of this that I think doesn't get brought up, and I understand why maybe it doesn't get brought up. But it's the whole idea that physical media was always going to go away, right? This was an inevitable thing, and we should just rip the Band-Aid off instead of pretending, because most of us who are talking about physical media being important are buying digital games, right? So we're part of the problem, and this was all inevitable. I want to roll back the clock a little bit, and there's two aspects of this that I want to talk about. And they both concern, to some degree, the process of buying something physical. So first of all, I worked in retail sales for, maybe 7 years on and off, some full-time, some part-time. I worked in independent video game stores. I worked at GameStop. I worked at a music shop, HMV, that sold games as well, right? So I worked within that space in numerous different places, always in the south of Ireland. So that's where all my data, I guess, is coming from. But, I was there selling stuff to people. And for me, before I broke into games coverage, this was the place where I learned the most about games, I guess, and people's habits with games and stuff like that. The importance of the secondhand market, I think, is really misunderstood. And I think when the current threat to gaming right now, and especially the consoles, is the fact that younger people aren't buying games, I think there is a solution we had for free in the past. There were multiple solutions that we had for free in the past that no longer exist, and now we're basically paying the fine for them. So today, a kid wants to play a game, right? They don't have a credit card. There's not many video game shops around selling games, and the games that they do sell are all $60. What do? They go on Fortnite, they go on Roblox, they go where their friends are, right? They play these games. On PC, we do see some conversion of older versions of those younger players getting into, friend slop stuff, right? I use that phrase with love. Games like Lethal Company, Among Us, obviously during COVID. So there is a transition. If a game is good enough and people have access to the hardware, and most kids these days have some sort of access to computers, usually for school, then there's a vector for them there, right? With consoles, so before consoles, right, I grew up in the Commodore Amiga era in Ireland, and we were able to literally copy the games and hand them to each other, right? But you also had demo discs. PlayStation had demo discs. Demos were like a way for people to get access to games that they may not play otherwise, which created generations of people like me and probably like you who are open to playing lots of different types of games, right? For this 10, 15 year period in between the sort of height of the demo scene and kind of where we are now with these live service experiences, there has been the only way that people had access to those types of experiences was through the secondhand retail market. So right now, Namco Bandai, right, has some RPG up on the PSN store, right? They're not monitoring the sales of that. They're not advertising it. They're not changing the prices dynamically to make sure people are buying it, right? For, decades, game stores were doing that for free. They have a profit motive to make sure that secondhand games go off the shelf. So if, those 15 copies of BMX XXX that we always had weren't selling, they went down to €5. Or they got bundled into, a buy 3, get the cheapest one free thing. So there was always this vector for younger kids especially to come in, pick up secondhand games, maybe pick up some games that they wouldn't, necessarily take a risk on, but because it's so cheap and because they know they can trade it back in, often for new games, you were basically training these kids to play different types of games. There were more games out there. They were physical. People were handing them to their friends. At one stage, Blockbuster was allowing you to rent games in the UK. I remember it was something crazy. You could pay like $7 a month and you'd get unlimited rentals. I just played everything. I played new games that way as well. But there was always these vectors for people to play different types of games and share different types of games. And that made gamers, that made people who would then come in a couple of years later and buy an Xbox 360 or buy a Wii or, buy a new game for that same console that they already owned. That's all gone. For the most part, that's essentially now gone. And this is not something that was planned necessarily. Obviously, when the digital storefronts came out, it makes a lot of sense for these companies to, make an offering for people there where they can get these games easily. And that's all well and good. And these days, do I go out to my local Best Buy and pick up a game? No, I don't. I download it on my machine, and I guess I'm part of the problem. But this is the other side of this conversation, which I think is really important. There's the sort of access that people had and building up and training players to play different types of games, to be exposed to different type of games we just don't have anymore because kids are playing Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, whatever. They're not going out and playing, they're not buying, 8 games a year like lots of us are. They're buying a game every 2 years or not buying a game at all. They're buying skins, right? The other side of this is those of us who would happily buy a physical version of a game. Look behind me. I'm a fucking sicko. I have all my Amiga games that I had as a kid there. I have all these PC big box games. I have all of these games here. Granted, I have a great excuse in that we filmed a lot of box B-roll here at NoClip, so I can just sort of write it off as my taxes or whatever. But the state that we're at now is this. And I should mention, this is actually not, I don't think this is an official release. I think this is one that I got, buying through one of these retailers I can't even fucking think of any of them now, but Limited Run or Fangamer or stuff like that, right? I think I got it through that. And it has a map in it and cool stuff. But even so, this is a pretty light offering. I think it came in a box with a bunch of stuff. This is what PC games turned into when I was a teenager. Games for Windows. Look, there's the disc. Games for Windows. I'm sure this came with one piece of paper in it. That probably had a fucking end user license agreement. This is how people tried to get people to buy fancy versions of games. Your Steelbook situation, which honestly I've always kind of hated because it's just tin. It comes with a code. What's this? It's the OST. If anyone wants the OST, there's a code for the OST. Enjoy. It's a good soundtrack. So that's where we ended up. Fucking Too Human on Xbox 360. At least these boxes were green and cool, right? And they had a manual in them, I guess. But the further you go back in time, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but let's just fucking look at these things, okay? Wipeout 2097 European version comes with a big, dirty, fat manual, which has information on all the sick bands that are in it. I'd argue maybe the European versions are better on PlayStation generally, but this American one is pretty sick. I like that. Doom on Super Nintendo. Look at these boxes. Granted, they had to have a cartridge in it, I understand, but they look cool. NHL 94, it's a big, look at all this shit you get in this. Some of it's ads, sure. There's a poster, there's a manual, there's a fucking introducing another game, EA Sportswear. Apparently that was a thing at one stage. That's how much these companies used to care about physical shit, is that they'd sell you a terrible golfing jacket. And then, all the way back to the Amiga. Look at the Street Fighter 2 box for the Amiga. We did a documentary on CD Projekt, back in, year 3 of NoClip. And the origin of that company was that they lived in a society in which people got pretty much all their media for free or buying them at cheap markets for 2 zloty. I don't know what Polish, sorry, I think that's Russian. Apologies, Poland. Polish dollars, Polish euros, Polish pounds, there we go. And they created a company that took those games that were purchasable cheaper at the next stand, and they put them in nice boxes with manuals, translated, with all of these like extra little gubbins in them. CD Projekt was a company about selling fucking CDs. And from that, they built a company large enough to make their own game. When was the last time like you or somebody you know bought vinyl, right? Vinyl right now is like exploding. Why is vinyl exploding? Is it because people are using record players more? No, it's because you can't fucking buy music in any other way. People want to hold things. It's why merchandise has become such a big thing for bands. That and the fact that streaming music has all but killed any profit that they'll get from their music being listened to by somebody. But like t-shirts and, you know, massive merch stands, or like, you know, putting on their own gigs so they're able to like sell more stuff to their hardcore fans. Like 95% of the vinyl that's purchased is never played, right? It's just, it sits on a shelf. People like it. Like as humans, we like holding onto a cool thing. And what's happened is game companies got that for free. That was never on a spreadsheet item. It was never something that they had I think was part of their business mathematics. It was something that just existed because games had to be sold to people and they needed to be able to put it in their computer. And then obviously over the years, shelf space got tighter, you know, packaging stuff became, you know, we'll nip and tuck here and there. And we ended up with the fucking Call of Duty World at War. I mean, this thing even feels like it's going to crack any second. And so no wonder people stopped buying physical stuff. And I know, look, there's no getting around the fact that the convenience of buying a game, the fact that most games get patched, you know, if they're not a live game, they're getting a day one patch regardless. I completely understand. But people will buy the fucking, you know, new Deftones album on vinyl and then they'll listen to it on their fucking phone. They'll do both. Do you think people buying the limited run games don't already own those games? Like, I owned Dredge. Why did I buy that? It was for B-roll stuff. But like, you know what I mean? Like the idea, this argument that like digital will always beat physical sales because of the convenience and all that sort of stuff. It is totally misunderstanding a significant motive that people have to buy those things physically. And here's where it sort of comes together for me, is that I think gaming over the past 20 years, aside from the fact that a lot of these kids are growing up and they see their parents playing and it's just not cool anymore, gaming itself has become so unbelievably fucking dry. It is so rizless, as the kids say. Games are cool. Some of the games that we cover on NoClip too, like in terms of game design, AAA is obviously having a real problem with stagnation. There are some games out there pushing the boundaries. I think Expedition 33, I think Arc Raiders, there's some games out there that are trying to do new things with gameplay or art or whatever, and I think that's really fucking cool. But most of the games that are doing interesting things, I believe, a lot of people who follow this channel believe, are on the indie side, specifically on PC. And there is a market for those type of people doing that sort of stuff. But when the Switch 2 was announced, I pragmatically understand why the Switch 2 looks the way it is and is the way it is and all that sort of stuff. But I criticized it at the time because I said, nobody's making hardware that's desirable anymore. There was a time for 30 years, probably most of my life of playing games, that consoles were cool. They were objects that were desirable in the same way that boxes were objects that were desirable. The new consoles are designed to sit in a living room and not take up any energy or space. Did you see the energy when that like Xbox that looked like the old Xbox, the translucent green one, was announced? Like, people want cool shit. There's millions of gamers, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of gamers around the world, and they want to buy cool shit. They would buy games in boxes if you sold them in a cool way. I don't know what the idea, maybe just leave the code. The code is probably fine. It probably doesn't need, you know, the fucking disc, but like have a version of the game that people can hold on to and keep, and people, you know, and people in preservation can rip off of it. So we have a copy of it somewhere, and maybe people plug the USB into their fucking PlayStation. Making a USB drive these days is probably cheaper than making a fucking optical disc at this stage, right? Put cool stuff in it, make it a desirable thing, celebrate it. Like, sell it, I don't know, maybe you can't sell it in the high street, you can sell it online, allow people to sell it to other people at game stores or on eBay or whatever. Like, have it be a transferable thing that people can sell and have it be cool that way. Make consoles that look interesting. I just feel like there is a complete lack of imagination when it comes to the platform holders for sure, but also perhaps maybe some of these publishers or developers who could do this on their own. You know what I mean? Like, if they have a license to put the game out, there's nothing stopping them from producing their own collector's editions or limited editions or stuff like this. So to me, this is infuriating because it's obviously been a slow death. It is the sort of enshittification of our industry, which has already happened to stuff like film and music. It makes me super angry. And the thing I think that makes me the most frustrated is, unfortunately, to change this, it's going to require people to do some really dangerous, exciting things when it comes to the consoles, how they work, how we sell games, the physical nature of this sort of stuff. And, with in the epoch, the business and technological epoch we live in at the moment, that is swimming upstream from the currents. So it really pisses me off, but I think this has been a long time coming, and I think outside of the fact that this is going to save people money, outside of the fact that people don't buy games physically right now over digital ones, I think this is a massive moment that the games industry is shooting itself in both feet, because what's going to happen is you're not going to get a lot of these younger players playing different games, trying different games. It just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen on Spotify. People don't listen to weird music. Some people do, most people don't. We don't listen to it anymore. We used to have the radio. You'd hear a new band. Nobody does that shit anymore. Movies, maybe people are more flick-aroundy on movies, but with games, they're not. They're either players who play lots of different games and try stuff, or they're not. And the problem is there's more of the or nots. And without a healthy second-hand physical marketplace in some way, we're not going to convert those people.